We're going to build a application that converts from base 10 or decimal to octal, binary, and hex. And in reality, you can convert to pretty much any base. We'll be using a standard little algorithm that's out there on the internet, and everybody pretty much uses it. Most of the textbooks will have it. We'll modify it for our needs, just so we can have some practice modifying the code and working with our own algorithm a little bit. And so I just want to go through the steps of doing this, so that we can you can see how it's done. One of the things that that I wanted to talk about with this is how to set up functions, how to set up the array, and also how to work with a string when we do this part. So it's a pretty basic function or application, and you'll see. Okay, so I have the initial page put up the way that the way that the C++ page shows up when you first start it, and so I'm going to start from scratch, and we'll just delete all this. Should be the first thing you do, just get rid of all this mess. Up here, I like to put my information. It's a good habit to do. So name, class if it's for a class, the assignment if it's an assignment, and the date. Alright, so the next thing that that we need to do is in this particular one, we'll be using the IOStream for to work with the console, but we're also going to be using string, so we need to include string, the string library, so that we can use its the different properties of string. Okay, one more thing that is always really handy to do is to add in the namespace std, and that's so that we can get rid of the std right here and anywhere else in this application. At this point, we're looking good. Now we'll go ahead and do a couple more things. This is going to be the spot in the main where I call my other functions, and so I'm going to go ahead and type in the information here, and then I'm going to comment it out. I frequently do that when when I haven't built the functions yet, but I know that I'm going to be calling them from there. Alright, so I have the this typed up now. You can see that I'm going to call from the console. I'm going to output the this function, decimal to new base, and this first one here is going to indicate the value that we're going to be passing. So this is for obviously for the decimal 10, decimal 22, decimal 10, decimal 47. The second argument is going to be the base. So base 10, base 8, base 2, base 16. I realize the first one's redundant. They're just for practice. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create our two different functions that we're going to use. Okay, so I typed in the two functions. What you should get out of this is that on lines 13 and 14 is that these functions, one's called decimal to new base, the other one's called get hex character. And on line 13, the decimal to new base, it has the word string, and that means the function is going to return a string. So what is returned by that function has to be a string. The arguments that we're going to pass it are good. They must be integers. So an integer that we're going to call d, an integer b, and the d for me just stands for the decimal value, and b stands for the base. So it's okay to comment your code here and just say, d is going to equal decimal and b is going to equal base. Okay, so the next one is the function get hex character. It's also must return a string, and the value that the argument that we're going to pass it is also going to be a decimal. Okay, so in here, like I said, we already have the different values we're going to call. We're going to call these values 10, 22, 10, and 47 as decimals, and they're going to be these bases: base 10, base octal, base binary, and base hex. All right. Next, I'll go ahead and create the two functions that we declared up here, decimal to new base and get hex character. They must be written identical as they are up here, and so I write them here and here on lines 24 and lines 32. And you can see it's just a skeleton of the code. So the integers, the arguments that they're going to intake, and then I'm going to return a string on both of these. So I went ahead and defaulted them. So these are just skeletons. There's nothing going on yet. Just they're just there and ready to be coded. So I'm going to work in the decimal to new base function first. And the first thing that we need to do is I need another variable that I'm going to call int r equals 0. I'm going to use this to track the remainder, because this is the function that's going to be doing the conversions from the decimal base, from base decimal or 10 to the other bases. The next thing I did is I created a while loop, and this while loop is going to take the value, the argument of d, and it's going to iterate until d is 0. If d hits 0, then it stops. And this little algorithm right here, this little while loop, this is a really common algorithm for converting from decimal to different bases. And you can find this little algorithm or a variation of it online or in almost any computer science book on programming. You'll see it over and over again. Python, C++, doesn't matter. They all use a version of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this little algorithm, and then we're going to modify it because we need to be able to handle our hex values too. And so I'll go ahead and explain what's happening in this little algorithm. So what's happening here is the decimal value that we're going to evaluate comes down, and we're going to take the modulus of that, which is to say, the way you say this is, let's use it for example, 10 modulus 10. So we're going to be taking the first value 10, and we're going to divide it by the base b, and then whatever the remainder is what r is going to be. That's why I use the variable r, because this really stands for remainder. So it's taking a number and dividing it by another number, and then whatever the remainder of that number is what is kept as r. So the right side of a decimal place is what becomes r. Okay, so the next line here on line 32, d is now equal to d divided by b. So now we're taking the quotient. So we're going to say, okay, well, what's the quotient now? So we take the quotient of b, d divided by b, and that becomes d. Then d comes back up here in the next iteration, and then we divide d by b again, and by the base again, and then we take that remainder. So this number just keeps getting smaller until eventually it's going to hit 0, and then until there's no remainder, and then we stop. And at that point, we're going to take we'll take the string. Right now, this isn't going to do anything because it's not completed. We have to do some other stuff for it to make it work. But I just wanted to go through the logic of the algorithm. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we're going to create an if-else statement, and I'll set that up. So I created the if-else statement right here underneath the while loop, and this is designed to take a look and see if we're using base 16, because if we're using base 16, we have to do a few things differently. And so base 16, if it's base 16, we're going to call our next function, which hasn't been created. There's nothing going on here yet, and it's going to do something prior to string being evaluated. So everything else, all these other bases, base 10, base 8, base 2, can be evaluated in this algorithm because they're all gonna fall to the else part, because it's going to look, the program is going to look to the bases and say, okay, base 10 is not base 16, therefore we're going to use this version to this string right here on line 41 to evaluate. And only on this last one here, 47 and 16, where it's base 16, would this first one happen. So basically right now we're at a point where we can actually test this. So let's go ahead and uncomment our first lines of code. Okay, so this is done, and let's go ahead and run it. So of course because I'm doing this kind of quick here, I made an error, and I want to go ahead and show you the error I made. All this code from line 35 through 42 needs to be inside of the while loop. Otherwise, this isn't going to make any sense. So it needs to be evaluated inside the while loop. So we're going to go ahead and cut it and stick it in the while loop where it belongs. All right. Now we have the algorithm, and now we have our new solution, where we're going to say, okay, if it's base 16, then evaluate using the getHex function. Otherwise, just disconcatenate the string. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. We can evaluate the first three bases because it's base 10, 8, and 2, not 16. So it'll never get to this line right here. It'll never get to line 36. Well, let's go ahead and run that. All right, so I'll line these up right here. You can see that 10 is 10, of course, 22 to base 8 or octal is 26, and 10 to decimal is 1010 using this algorithm. Again, it never hits the line 36. It's always going to hit line 40 to be evaluated because it's not base 16. So now we need to finish our hex values. And so this function here is complete. We can just fix our formatting, and the decimal to new base is complete. Now we need to complete our getHex character function. And so the getHex function, what we're going to need here is we're going to need an array, and I'm going to go ahead and build that and show you. So here's our array on line 51. And what this is saying that we have an array H, we're just going to call it H for hex, and it's going to have 6 elements, and here they are, A, B, C, D, E, and F. And what's going to be, then they're going to be strings. Now you could use char, you could use different data types, but for ours we're just going to stick with string, and so here we have a string. All right, the reason that we used this is because hex is actually 16 characters. That's 0 through 9 and A through F. And you could write the whole thing. You could say 0 through 9 right in here and include it through F. But I prefer to do it a little bit differently, just, I don't know, maybe because it's more fun or something. I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of logic and use an if-else statement, and I'll be right back. So on lines 53 through 61, we added this new little if-else statement, and I'll go ahead and explain it. So what's happening here is the argument that's passed, D, is going to be evaluated to see if it's less than 10. If it's less than 10, then all we're going to do is return D as a string, because it's 0 is going to be 0, 1 is going to be 1, 2 is going to be 2, all the way through 9. However, if it's 10 or greater, remember we need a letter because hex is letters. So, well, the partially letters. So here we're going to say, okay, if it's, let's say it's 10. So the argument comes in as 10, and we need to find what is the hex value of 10. Well, it's going to drop down here to the else statement because it's 10, and we're going to subtract 10, and that means 0. And now we're doing that so that we can hit the element 0 of our array. So element 0 of the array is A, and so 10 is going to be A. Now let's say 11 was passed. So 11 comes here. 11 is not going to fit this situation. So we come down here. 11 minus 10 is 1. We look at, okay, L is going to be equal to whatever is in the array H1. H1 is B. B would be returned, and so forth. And so now we have created our getHex char function. Again, yes, there's built-in functions in C++ to do this, but this is just to practice writing our own functions and writing some arrays and using a little bit of logic with our if-else statements. Okay, so now we can go back and we can uncomment our last call here to the decimal to new base function. We're going to be passing it the value 47 in decimal, and we want to know what it is in hex. So let's run that. And here, there you have it. Get it over here. So the value is 2F, which is correct. 47 converted to base 16 is 2F. And this is how you create a conversion function. So the first function here, decimal to new base, takes in two values, 2 integers, 2 arguments, the decimal value and the base value. And I already explained the algorithm, and we just throw this little if-else statement in to catch when it's going to be a base 16, so that if it's base 16, we're going to pass it through the getHex function so that we can retrieve either a number 0 through 9 or a letter A through F, depending on where it falls. Return it, concatenate it to the string, and then get our answer. So I'll just scroll through the code one last time so you can take a look. All right, that's it.